Our first one is titled, Does Fertility Rapidly Decline in Early 30s? Just looking for people's experiences in having kids in their 20s and then in their 30s. I've had all my kids in my 20s and had no fertility issues and fell pregnant within 3 months with them all. My last was born just after I turned 30. We are considering trying again when I've been in my current job for 18 months. I'll be 34, almost 35 when we begin to try. My husband will be 35. Have you found it more difficult to conceive as you age? I'd love to try earlier, but the job I currently have and want to keep, I'm going to learn a lot in the first year, then would like to have a bit more experience before I'm hoping to get pregnant. Sorry if this is in the wrong group to post in, but couldn't figure out a better one. So obviously the fundamental question that she asked, actually, I'm quite happy that she decided to ask, because I think it's a pretty fair thing to ask. Although maybe just getting anecdotal evidence from a whole bunch of people on the internet is not actually going to say a lot or give you much to go on when it comes to your individual circumstances and your particular situation when it comes to fertility. So whether it's really very clever that she decided to ask or not, I would always take everything that people say here with a grain of salt, because there's a lot that goes into fertility. And so in general, this is one of those perfect scenarios. I think there was data that came out a couple of, like maybe about a year ago, that suggested that there are more women in their 30s now without kids than there are like who hit 30 years old. There are more women who are 30 years old who do not have kids than there are 30-year-old women with kids. And so we have definitely seen this shift societally where we're having kids later and later, of course, largely also because we have technologies and things that make it easier to have kids when you're like 40, which was not probable for the majority of women, not that easy or not that possible to happen naturally for a long time. And so it's a pretty natural question. I appreciate that she's asking it. I wouldn't take anything that people say here too seriously, but I think that the big thing to keep in mind with fertility is that we do have this image of it, that there's like a specific cutoff point. You know, for example, the general cutoff point that people will throw around is 35, as if there is a change that your body goes through the moment that you hit 35, that suddenly you're not as fertile anymore. When obviously what happens is that fertility starts to gradually decline. Generally speaking, when you hit about 30 years old, for the majority of women, and so for the majority of women, it's going to be the case that you're more fertile in your 20s. And then when you hit your 30s is when it starts going down. By the time you hit 35, it's already maybe half of what it was. And then it goes down even further. And by the time you hit 40, it's maybe like 10% of what it was. And then it continues going down. So it's obviously a transition. We somehow seem to convince ourselves that there's always these straight cutoff points. We do it actually also very similarly with miscarriages. For example, a lot of people say after you're 12 weeks pregnant, then the likelihood of having a miscarriage is very low. And this is of course true. But again, it's not that 12 weeks is a line in the sand that you can say, okay, from this point onwards, now it's not going to happen. Biology just doesn't work that way. Biology is all in waves and things change gradually. And so what I find really interesting about this particular case is, yes, fertility does decline. How rapid that is depends on the women, on the specific individual woman, even who's thinking about having kids slightly later on than she did before. And obviously fertility depends a lot on other factors that are going on in your life as well. So for example, if your health is not in good shape, if your hormones aren't in good shape, then your fertility is going to be a bit dodgy. It's possible that there are some women out there for whom, for example, if their health is in really bad shape during their 20s, and actually their 30s might be better off if they manage to get their health in better shape. So there's always that level of variation. But yes, chances are, especially if you've already had kids, you've had that experience, by the time you hit 30, you're going to find that the experience of pregnancy is a little bit harder for your body to handle, and it may take you longer to get pregnant. And what I find really kind of amusing to me about this situation is the reason that she wants to wait before deciding to have the next baby that she wants. For me, this idea of, I want to learn a lot in the first year in this job, and then I want to stay until I have a bit more experience. and then I want to start trying to have a baby. Obviously, it may work out, you know. I would just challenge if that really makes sense for a lot of women. For me personally, I would not be delaying when I want to have kids. If I wanted to have kids in my mid-30s, I wouldn't be delaying it because I want to have a little bit more experience in this job. This idea of I want to keep this job, I'm really attached to it. I just don't think that I would ever choose a job over the potential of being able to have a child. And I could not imagine going through the heartache of, for example, if it takes 6 months to get pregnant or 8 months to get pregnant, for me to feel like, hey, maybe I would have had a much easier time if I had chosen to do it earlier. But obviously, you know, people make their own choices and make their own decisions. So I'm not saying that she can't do that or anything. I would just, for me personally, I would find it a little bit strange. Now, what's really funny about the comments here, you'll see a lot of people, like people fall in two buckets. One bucket is all the people who got pregnant really easily in their 30s, and they're like, there's absolutely no problem, don't worry about it, you can do whatever you want. And that, I think, is a lie that a lot of women tell themselves. And then obviously the other women who did have some struggles. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The first person says, not at all, fertility does not decline. That is the question that she's asking. She says that with her first baby, she got pregnant on the 3rd try at 33 years old. And then she says, mind you, I had been on birth control for 18 years at that point, got pregnant with twins on the first try at 34, had a miscarriage, then got pregnant first try after mid 34. Now, these are the types of statements that people make. For a lot of people, if you've been on birth control for 18 years, that's actually going to have a serious impact on your fertility. So I'm very glad for her that she managed to just get off birth control and get pregnant straight away. But when people state these things and they state them as if they're fact and they're like, of course it's going to be like this for everyone, it always makes me deeply uncomfortable. And then things like getting pregnant with twins and then having a miscarriage. Missed miscarriages are exceedingly rare. They're extremely rare as an experience for people to go through. And these are the types of questions that I would always have in terms of what have I done to my system that this type of thing happens. So for women who experience a lot of miscarriages or who have a miscarriage or who struggle to get pregnant for a long time, all of these questions come into play. This one says, I spent my 20s trying very hard not to get pregnant, so I have no basis for comparison, but my kids were both conceived our first cycle trying when I was 30 and when I was 34. And that's also hilarious to me because she can't make a comparison. So yes, she managed to conceive straight away, which is also amazing. Awesome, super happy for her. But there's always a sense of confidence that people have. I'm always like, don't promise things to people and then have them get heartbroken because they don't fall into the specific bucket that you fall into. This one says, I was 32 when I became pregnant. It took 2 cycles. My gynecologist told me that I had, and still do at 34, plenty of eggs and no cysts. But of course, this is a case-by-case thing. And this is very, very, very much the case. A lot of women, like especially with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome is becoming more and more common these days, and women are getting diagnosed with that earlier. And things like endometriosis is also another illness that impacts fertility. So people have things going on. And so you cannot, like, you have to really look into your particular situation before you can make any assumptions here. This person says, I think it depends on the person and maybe their lifestyle choices. I'm 40 and very healthy. And my last 2, I got pregnant the same month that I tried. And with my first in my 20s, it was the same thing. Breathe on me without protection. And I'm pregnant. And I like this one because she does say, hey, I'm lucky to be in this position of being able to get pregnant at 40 years old quite quickly. Now, to show you some of the others to contrast, she says, the first one says, I had my first 3 in my 20s. I'm 34 and just had my last baby in July. No problem getting pregnant with the first 3. It took 20 months to get pregnant with our new little man. And 20 months is a long time. Like for a lot of doctors, they'd say if you're struggling to conceive for longer than a year, then you should get checked out for fertility problems in general. Like it's worth doing some testing there to see where your hormones are at. This one says, first pregnancy was at 27, now I'm 30, both were the first try. I think the issue is that statistically, being more likely to have issues with the pregnancy or the baby the older you get, rather than ability to conceive in general, but I'm not a scientist. Also, if you are more likely to have your own health issues the older you get, and that can impact pregnancy, such as type 2 diabetes, autoimmune conditions, muscle and skeletal issues, and stuff like that, which is rarer or not yet developed in younger people. Now, generally speaking, a lot of women will kind of bounce back from a pregnancy a lot quicker, a lot faster, and a lot easier. with the younger they are. So obviously the older you are, the longer it takes for your body to adjust and for your body to recover. And this is kind of true across the board. You know, kids heal very quickly, and then when you're a 30-year-old person, then it takes a bunch longer, and when you're 50, then it takes even longer, and so on. So pregnancy is kind of similar in that sense, that if you're in your 20s, you're likely, for the majority of people again, to recover a bit faster. And then this one says, she had problems with fertility, got pregnant the first month. I lost my virginity at 18, birthed at 19, got pregnant using spermicide at 23, got pregnant after a single try at 26, tried for 5 months at 32 before getting pregnant and having a miscarriage at 6.5 weeks, tried 3 or 4 more months before conceiving again right around my 33rd birthday. And that is relatively typical from like if you for the people who have had experience in their 20s and then in their 30s, that happens. Then that's not an abnormal experience that she had. And the final one, she says, I don't know what to say about my 20s because I got my first at 34 after just a month and a half of trying. The second I got at 36 in my first fertile cycle, but this third at 38 after the 9th cycle. So you can see there also, just like the longer you delay, the more time it takes, generally speaking, for your body. And that is basically what fertility is in the end. Like how difficult is it to get pregnant and to hold on to a pregnancy.